Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how you might be killing innovation within your organization. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Robyn Bolton. Welcome, Robyn.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Do you want to share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the founder and chief navigator of MileZero, which is a consulting firm that works with leaders of medium and large businesses to help them to use innovation to confidently and repeatedly grow their business. My background, I've spent basically my whole career in innovation, starting off at Procter Gamble. I was on the team that developed and launched Swiffer and Swiffer WetJet. And, then things in between. I worked on the Walmart sales team, got my MBA at Harvard, worked at Boston Consulting Group. And then before founding my own firm, actually spent about 9 years at a consulting firm founded by Clayton Christensen. So got very deeply immersed in the innovator's dilemma, disruptive innovation, all of that really important, you could say scary stuff, but also opportunistic, interesting areas, kind of stuff around innovation, and then founded MileZero.
Well, excellent. But before we get into kind of maybe why leaders kill innovation, maybe we can lay the foundation a little bit about why innovation is so important. I have some thoughts, but would love to hear why, where you place innovation on the scale of importance and why.
I place it, probably not surprisingly, extremely, extremely high. And that is because every company needs to grow. Every organization needs to grow. Not just for-profit companies. And yes, everybody, a company has its products, its services, its offerings, and they can work on growing those, and they should work on growing those. But that isn't going to get you the growth rate that you need as a company to stay ahead of competition, and certainly to stay ahead of new entrants. So there is kind of what I call the growth gap of a difference between what your aspiration is in terms of, whether it's revenue or profit, and what you have line of sight to. And that's what innovation or M&A is really for. And so you need innovation really to help achieve your goals. And we can get into all the complexity of different types of innovation and the best ways to do it. But long story short, too late. If you want to reach your growth goals, you have to innovate.
Do you think that it's, the thing that comes to mind to me is the rate of acceleration within technology and just changing landscape, period. So do you think that we're in a time where you do have to innovate more quickly than maybe 20 years ago?
I think just everything is moving faster. So you do have to innovate more quickly just because you have to do everything more quickly. And that can be really, really challenging for, established companies, companies, medium, large, 1,000 people plus, however you want to look at company size, because once you're, kind of a grown-up company, so to speak, you got that way. You got successful by doing things over and over and doing them better, faster, cheaper. And so change is threatening and risky and scary, but it's got to happen faster and faster, as you said.
Do you think that some organizations have a misconception about what innovation means? I mean, do we put it too high on a pedestal, or it means incubators and and R&D and all of this stuff, where maybe so some companies are like, oh, that's not for me, or we don't need that? Or I mean, what do you see out there with what companies view, how they view innovation?
Yeah, I think it's everything you said, and I think it's all of the above. And so one of the first things I do when I work with clients is I'll go around the room and have everybody define innovation, because inevitably they bring in we want to be more innovative. I'm like, great, what does that mean? And in a room of 8 people, you'll get 9 definitions of innovation. And to some people, it is new to the world. And to some people, it's an improvement on what they're currently doing. And so when you have that kind of difference in opinion, just in one room around what innovation is, it just leads to all sorts of misunderstanding and miscommunication and teams going across purposes. And so it's important to kind of say, all right, what do we as an organization mean as innovation? And then really, you need a portfolio. You need to be improving the things that you do, and adjacent innovation, expanding into new markets, expanding into new customers. And you need to be doing kind of the radical transformative innovation, but there's different structures that are well suited for each one. So, a lot of companies they have 9 different definitions of innovation, and they want to solve all of those different definitions with like one single team and one single initiative. And that's just not how it works.
Would love to hear about, a couple of those examples of different structures about, what a company does to facilitate the different types of innovation.
Yeah. So, a couple of examples. One, I mentioned early in my career at Procter Gamble, I was on an innovation team. And back at the time, it was called new business development. So a new business development team, we sat within a business unit. And that's where we worked on, at the time, it's Swiffer. So that was an adjacent innovation. It was doing something different in terms of creating kind of a lasting product, not 100% consumable. But it was still aligned within a business unit. Other teams within the business unit, Tide, Mr. Clean, Dawn, those teams worked on their incremental innovation. So, coming out with a new scent of Tide. And then completely outside of the business units were other teams that P&G had set up to look at kind of radically new business models like Tide Dry Cleaners or Mr. Clean Car Wash. And, I think in a lot of ways, P&G was ahead of the curve on recognizing that, hey, incremental innovation, improving what you do, expanding it a little bit, is best done by the teams that work on those things already. And you need a different group of people to work on things that are outside of kind of your core business, but still related. And you need something completely different outside of the current structure to really work on transformative innovation. And that general model and framework is something I've used with lots of different clients, from apparel to medical devices to education, of really thinking about, okay, what is it that you need to get from your innovation efforts? How can we create a portfolio to do that? And then what are the right structures to support that?
Do you find, obviously you're illustrating how Procter and Gamble kind of approached it in multiple angles at the same time. Do you find that companies sometimes spend too much focus on incremental innovation and miss the mark on, maybe completely changing direction and where the market's headed?
It's interesting. I find the opposite. Companies are really good at incremental innovation, and they feel like, oh, we should be doing something else. We should be out there on the cutting edge of things. And so they devote time and resources to kind of that transformative innovation. And I think that's better. Those are time and resources that, for existing companies, are better spent on adjacent innovation. So yes, keep working on improving what you're doing and kind of coming up with the next version, because that's what keeps you ahead of competition. That's what keeps the lights on and the paychecks from bouncing. You need to do that to stay in the game. Trying to disrupt yourself is just, the organizational antibodies are just going to kill whatever you're doing, because it's a threat to the existing organization. There are ways to do it, but those ways are through M&A or through venture studios where something's created outside. I think where companies can and should spend more time is, okay, what is expansion into adjacent areas, into new markets, new geographies, new customers, new types of offerings, because that will feel really radical, but it's In truth, it's not, but it will also help you leapfrog competition and kind of set a new standard without going all the way to something truly disruptive.
Well, let's turn a little bit then and talk about, we were, as we said at the beginning of the show, that leaders can be killing innovation within an organization. And what do you mean when you say that?
Yeah. So what I mean is that a lot of times leaders will look at the state of innovation in their organization and they will say, we don't have enough ideas, or the ideas we have aren't creative enough. And they will see it as an idea problem. And the thing is, it's not an idea problem. Every organization has more ideas than it knows what to do with, because people are full of ideas. What it is a leadership problem. It's also a leadership opportunity. So what I mean by that is that leaders get to the positions they're at because they're really good at what they do. And they're really skilled. They have great experience. They've shown that they can generate results. That's how they got promoted and got into leadership. And that is operating. Innovating requires almost the exact opposite skill set, approach, kind of way of working. So whereas operating is something like you have more knowns than unknowns, you can predict what is going to most likely happen next, and you have a sense for how problems need to be solved. When you're innovating, you have more unknowns than knowns. You definitely can't predict what's going to happen next, and you don't even have an instinct for the answers. And so you have to, as a leader, you have to engage in a very different way. You have to, approach it as learning. And, the phrase fail fast, like, I hate that phrase, because if you're learning, you're not failing. Learning is the only way you can make progress when you're doing something new. But that's a very different mindset and approach for leaders to be like, oh, we tried something, it didn't work. That's great, because now we're smarter and we have odds of making a better decision. And the patience that's required. We can't put a Gantt chart around this work. We can set guardrails, but I can't tell you that we're going to have the answer on April 22nd. We'll have the answer sometime in Q2, kind of thing. So it's this very real tension that leaders face when they are in a position where they need to operate and innovate. And I have a lot of empathy for it, because I cannot say with any level of confidence that, I would do something different. I'm just aware of the tension. And oftentimes, especially when you look at, the metrics and the incentives that leaders have, they're measured on how they're done today, how things are going today. They're measured on today's business, this quarter, this year. They get bonuses based on what they deliver. And innovation is not a this quarter, this year thing. And so a leader will do the totally logical thing and say, hey, I have limited resources. I have $1 or a person. I can give it to innovation. And I don't know what'll happen. I don't know if I'll get anything back. And even if I do get something back, I don't know when I will. Or I could give that to the operating part of the business, and I know exactly what I'll get back. I know what my ROI is. I know when I'll get it. And any logical person would take the sure bet. So those are kind of all the ways that leaders, even if they're really passionate about innovation, even if they recognize its strategic importance, that they inadvertently kill it because they're making really logical decisions that have been proven to work.
Yeah, and it sounds, I think when I think about innovation, it's very ambiguous. Like you said, you're not quite sure where you're headed. But I mean, how important is structure though still around that innovation? Because that's like translating it to the project world. A lot of people like to say, they misuse agile. right?
Mhm.
And make it sound like, oh, when you have agile, you don't really have to plan in the future and you don't have to know the roadmap a year from now. And it's like, well, you still do. What agile is acknowledging is that, you can only have precision in the near term, and in the long term, it's not precise, but you still know where you're headed, and there's still, structure. People like to try to use agile to throw structure out the window. So how is that in like relate to innovation, and what kind of structure, if any, is there in that?
I personally believe there's a lot of structure. Like, you don't want to rely on miracles and magic and chaos to, to do something as strategically and financially important as innovation. So there absolutely is and should be structure and a process around it. But as you said, like with agile, you can only define it so much at any given time. And so I talk about, there's lots of innovation processes out there. I always talk about, the first step is you've got to understand the problem. You've got to diagnose the problem. Is it a problem worth solving? Then you got to come up with a lot of ideas, because if you fall in love with the problem, you're going to be open to whatever idea solves it best. Then you have to make sure whatever the best idea is actually can become the best business, or the best, business proposition. Then you de-risk the idea, and then you launch and scale it. So you can have these specific steps with specific, objectives. And I always think of them in kind of like 90-day blocks of, at the very least, every 90 days, you have to be coming forward with, a material leap forward. You may need, a year to fully de-risk an idea, but my gosh, every 30 days, or every 90 days, you better be coming in and being like, yes, we need to keep going, or you know what, we learned enough, let's shut it down. So no black box, which a lot of innovation teams, or any team really does, is like, oh, I'll come talk to you when I, need a decision. It's like, no, you can't disappear for a year. It's like having kids. As soon as the kids get quiet, like nothing good happens. Same thing in business. If the team disappears for an extended period of time, like, bad things, you at least start imagining bad things. So there definitely is a structure. There definitely is a process. The specificity you can put around the activities, it changes over time. You're able to put more specifics around what's closer to you, but there does have to be a regular cadence of progress.
You were mentioning that it sounds like one of the challenges with innovation is we've got the wrong rewards and metrics set up around it. So what should companies be doing differently than to encourage innovation within those teams that should be innovating?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll be honest, I think it's a nut that hasn't quite been cracked, because, given the fact that innovation is a long-term investment, and it will take, at best 3 to 5 years, to get an adjacent innovation into the market, you need long-term incentives. The challenge with that is, so even if you say 3 years, okay, the average tenure of a CEO, I think, is maybe 2 to 4 years. So right there, the CEO, the most senior person of the company, doesn't really have kind of a long-term, viewpoint. Then when you consider most people probably change jobs either within the company or leave the company in 2 years, there's kind of this 2-year cycle. Suddenly you have to create a compensation system that rewards people for things that happen after they've left a role, and for things that, maybe somebody else did. You think about, hey, if you start an innovation project, you work on it for 2 years, and then someone takes over in the last year to launch it. You can get into a lot of debates of like, oh, is the success of the launch because of you starting it in the first 2 years, or what happened in the third year? So there's an incredible amount of complexity in setting up long-term incentives. I know a lot of companies have tried to adopt kind of the VC sort of founder model of, just like with the founder, if something launches and it does great, you get a huge, in theory, check from that. Again, in a company, you don't have the full control that a founder does. You also, most corporate innovators don't have the risk profile, so they don't need the huge reward. So there's all these certainly things to think about, things that have been tried. And again, we haven't cracked the nut, but I think we need to keep figuring it out. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be kind of in this short-term cycle of innovation.
Do you find that people would stay longer within roles if the right compensation structure was there? Because, you think about a founder, and what's exciting is, growing something and seeing it be successful. And so how do you get somebody, I guess, invested in what's happening enough that they don't want to leave, because you've either found the right person who's, that really gets them excited, or, I'm not sure, but.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're right. You have to find the right person. And when I've talked to corporate innovators who really are the right person, they're willing to stay for, to get something to launch or get to a point where, it's ready to kind of enter the traditional systems and processes that a company has, because they do have that passion and that ownership mindset. And the challenge they face is that kind of the bigger corporate HR system is basically saying, oh no, every 2 years you need to turn, or, not to pick on corporate HR, you can expand it even broader, and the corporate world, other companies, if they don't see you progressing kind of on a 2-year time frame, they're like, oh, what's wrong with you? So, the corporate innovator may want to stay, but then they kind of look at the bigger picture and be like, what am I giving up by staying in a role longer than kind of what people think of as the traditional time? But I get to keep learning, and I get to keep doing new things, and I get to see this thing that I love and that I've built kind of come to fruition. So I think a lot of it is helping the right people to navigate kind of that tension that they'll feel and make the right decision for themselves, versus kind of, being steered by a lot of outside voices. Because you're right, when you find the right people, they want to stay. They feel the ownership of things, but they also feel like that may not be the best move for their long-term career.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What are some of the other, I guess, pitfalls that you see companies fall into in this space around, and not just the HR side, but just in general within the innovation space? Are there other things that cause them to quickly fail?
Yeah, yes.
And not the
quickly
good fail,
learn.
not the fail fast so that you can learn, but
like fail. I do see a lot of companies can use innovation as an event. And so what I mean by that is, again, with all good intentions, leadership will look around and say, we want to build a culture of innovation. We want to build a culture where people feel comfortable asking questions, taking risks, suggesting ideas. And so let's kick this off with an event. Usually it's a hackathon. Great intentions, like absolutely great intentions. But innovation isn't an event. So you have a hackathon, people love it. You have started to create the conversation and the culture and everything that you want as a leader. And then the hackathon ends. And you haven't thought about what happens next. So when it ends, everyone just goes back to what they were doing before. And this starts breeding skepticism. This starts breeding kind of this distrust of like, well, yeah, leaders may say they care about innovation and they want us to be innovative, but they don't really. If they really did, they would have, kept things going after the event. And I've seen in companies where you have, an annual hackathon, you have kind of the younger to the organization employees be like, this is great. And the more tenured employees be like, Mm-hmm. Yep, nothing's going to come out of this. And it kind of, skepticism becomes cynicism.
Mm.
And ultimately these events, motivate the exact opposite of what they were intended for. And so it's not to say that a hackathon is a bad thing or an innovation event is a bad thing. It's that you need to think about what happens after, how to keep that momentum going. And that's where, again, kind of the commitment of leadership, the commitment of resources, the patience for results, that comes in after the event. And that's much harder to sustain than, a really cool event for a week.
As you're talking, I don't know if I read it in a book or where, but around this idea of giving people, whether it's a half day every week or a day every 2 weeks or something, that they can work on whatever they want. And I remember reading it in context of kind of the same thing as a hackathon, but obviously it's now long-term and it's, kind of your pet project. Have you seen that work, or have you heard of doing things like that?
Yeah. So 3M definitely made that famous. Google also kind of made it famous, a few decades or so later. And what we've seen is that both 3M and Google have backed off of that model. And the reason for that is there's a few reasons. One is that you want to make sure what people are working on is in some way consistent with your company strategy. Like, you don't want to pay people to go create their own startup and they're working for 3M, but they're founding a restaurant kind of thing. So you want to make sure that it's strategically aligned and that it feeds into a priority the company has. Which then already that takes away some of the freedom that is promised in a 20% model. The other thing is that, the tyranny of now, as I call it, is real. Like the deadlines you have, the need for results, that pressure that we all feel every day in our jobs to produce, it is real. And it will always crowd out that 20% time. And so what, I know Google and 3M and a lot of other companies that adopted the model found is that, their high performing, their best talent was going to using that 20% time to catch up on all the things that they felt like they needed to do. And it was some of their lower performing folks who actually had the free time to work on whatever was interesting to them. And so, it was kind of this weird, balance and tension. And so I think that's why ultimately they've, 3M has backed off the model and Google has really kind of, put a lot of process and restrictions and guidance around it in terms of you now have to propose a project, you have to have a detailed plan. It's not just, hey, take Friday to work on your passion project.
Yeah, we're experimenting a little bit, and I will not claim to know anything about innovation, because I'm more of an, I guess, an incrementalist, right? Like at my heart, a project manager, so I like to know, like, here's the start, here's the finish, here's the steps, and then the place I excel is looking at what's going on and seeing how to do it better. So like the ambiguity sometimes within innovation is really is challenging for me. But yeah, we have an innovation council, and that's trying to exactly what you said. Like, yeah, we were hearing about pockets of people working on things, which is great, but it's like, what are they spending their time on? And how do you, we were trying to figure out, how do you balance encouraging people to still do things like that, but also making sure that we're spending our team's time wisely. And so, yeah, we developed this council that the point is you're supposed to bring an idea and talk about, what's the market need that you think you're filling? How do you think this thing that you're building is going to be translatable into selling, et cetera. So it's been an interesting process. We've only had 2 or 3 council meetings, but yeah, it's this fine balance between fostering creativity and that aspect with that, with as well as combine with structure and strategy and some of those harder skills.
Yes. Yeah.
And by hard, I mean not soft. I don't mean tough.
Yes, the hard skills. But what you just described is what I've seen as kind of best practice. It's like create the space for people to be creative and be curious and to learn, but don't just be like, yeah, like here's a blank check, go knock yourself out, because there's still a company to run. And
right.
Incremental innovation, like don't poo-poo it. Like there's been work done on, you need a portfolio of innovation, as I mentioned. And, first, I think the golden ratio, as it's called, is that 70% of your innovation resources should be focused on incremental innovation, because it is so important to keeping the organization viable and operating as you wait for the adjacent innovation, which is golden ratio 20%, to come online, which is waiting for the transformational investments or the M&A to come online. You need to have that incremental. So incremental is hugely important. It just, isn't sexy and doesn't get the magazine covers.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because I guess we do have we have two other councils, which is delivery excellence, which is about how do you incrementally improve our outward facing services. Yep. And then we have one that's called the Process Improvement Council, which is about internal improvement. But I never really tie that to innovation. It was more about optimization and efficiency, and how to make everybody's job easier so they can focus on the stuff that's hard, right? Why clients hire us? Like we can focus on that stuff.
Exactly. And there's a fine line between continuous improvement, which is also super important, and kind of incremental innovation, and then on out. They're all important. They are all desperately important for the survival of an organization. So yes, you should invest in all of it.
Right.
And
with your million bazillion dollars that you have.
If you are by chance not Apple, then make sure you're investing in the things that keep you in business. And then from there, the things that will grow your business and on out.
Well, yeah, and that's why we say avoiding corporate mortality events, because that's the number one thing, is how do you stay in business, and then, like you said, then grow / thrive. But you got to avoid the corporate mortality event first.
Yes, yeah, it's it doesn't matter if you've come up with the next world-changing idea if you're also in bankruptcy.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and then, those are the challenges and constraints of the real world, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, and it is very, very real.
Well, Robyn, this has been really fun conversation. What three things you want to leave top of mind with folks?
Great question. So I'd say, first off, to the leaders out there, that tension that you feel between operating and innovating is real. It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It's real. And the fact that you feel that tension is good. Your goal now, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to figure out how to live with that tension, and how to both operate and innovate in a way that is best for you and best for your organization. Second thing I'd say is innovation isn't an event. It can start with one, but have a plan for after. Have a plan for how to keep the momentum going, how to keep the excitement going, and keep the projects and the things people are working on going. And last, I would say is, like we've talked about a lot, you want to have a portfolio of innovation. Incremental innovation, yes, be part of that. Get really, really good at it. And, set up a team, set up a structure to focus on adjacent innovation, because it is really different from how you operate. And you know what? It's okay if you're like, we're going to leave the disruptions and the transformations and the world changing stuff to startups, or we're going to acquire our way in once it's proven. That's probably, quite honestly, the best use of your resources. So if you have to choose, I'd say go incremental and adjacent.
Well, Robyn, that great advice, and it's been a lot of fun. Where can folks get in touch with you or learn more about what you do?
Sure. So you can go to my firm's website, which is MileZero, and that's zero spelled out, .io. So you can learn more about what we do and more about my background. You can also check me out on LinkedIn at Robyn. So it's Robyn with a Y, M. Bolton.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.